Welcome to the Space for It with Makayla and Jacob. We are two therapists working to navigate making space for what comes up as part of the human experience. And today, we are going to talk about experiencing multiple emotions at the same time, and if that's possible, and what it looks like, and how to do it. So, right off the bat, I'm curious, Makayla, how many emotions can we experience multiple emotions at the same time? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question. I love that we brought this one up to talk about because I think it comes up a lot in sessions. I also got really curious as you stated the question a little differently there of like, how many emotions can we feel at once? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how many is the limit. Um, and yeah, we totally can feel more than one emotion at a time. Um, and we often don't know that that's possible. And our brain doesn't seem to naturally know that, or maybe it's a part of our culture. I'm not really sure exactly where it comes from, but what do you think, Jacob?
I'm I'm curious if it happens a lot and we just aren't really aware of it. Because often when I think about experiencing emotions, I think about kind of the more specific, like, oh, I'm feeling very sad, or I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling really happy. And I think about that one thing in that one moment rather than actually stepping back sometimes and being like, what are all the things going on here? And so I almost think probably we spend more time thinking about experiencing one at a time, only because usually that's how many we focus on at a time is one.
Yeah, and as you say that there too, it's like how do we recognize emotions? How do we even notice or learn to notice like what emotion we're having? Do we have the language for those minute differences to be able to discern between maybe happiness or happiness and something else? Um, yeah, so maybe part of it, our brain's tendency is that simplification to like, what are the most prominent things we're feeling? Can I just identify that? I wonder if it's an efficiency that our brain has tried to help us with.
I mean, I think that makes sense, but I would also guess that it's partly like I think the name for experiencing multiple emotions at the same time. I don't know if there's a fully official name, but the name I've heard is emotional blending. Um, and if you look at a name like that and think about what it implies this idea that the emotions that you're experiencing are actually mixing together. Or at least that's what I take when I hear the word blending. I
Yeah,
think of a blender. But
interesting.
I think that in a way, if we're having an emotional experience that's bringing, like, let's say we're well, let's use a good one where the emotions will often feel contradictory. If you are maybe graduating from college and you spent 4 years in a place, and you're graduating and leaving and going on to something new, on the one hand, you're very likely to feel some excitement because it's like, yes, there's something new. Maybe you're starting a new job. Maybe you're going to a new place. There's some new chapter you're opening, and that can be really fun. But also, you're leaving. You're you're about to step out of what has been familiar. You're about to step out of a stage of life where you are surrounded by people in a way that you're likely never to be again, and that's really sad, and that can bring a grieving process up, which is very different and can feel very contradictory to that excitement piece of like, oh my goodness, guess what's next?
Yeah,
And like thinking about trying to blend those, it seems like it almost will always feel contradictory because like, why am I sad? I should be happy, or why am I happy? I should be sad.
yeah, yeah. Like, which one is right?
Does one of them have to be right?
I don't believe so. No. I think as we are such complex beings, it does us a disservice
Mhm.
to think that one has to be right, that I can only feel one of these things, that um, I have to choose. Like, that seems way too simple for the complexity that is involved in being human and having experiences and the vast context that surrounds that. As you brought up graduation, I can remember or imagine feelings of relief and sadness and joy and
Mhm.
all of those different things because there are so many aspects to it. There's an ending, there's a beginning, there's an accomplishment, there's uncertainty. There's all of these pieces, as well as what it means to my family, what it means to me, how it moves me along my path, or maybe I don't know what that path is. Um, it's too complex for just one.
I'm curious, where in our development, or how do we learn about experiencing multiple emotions, or maybe do we learn how to hold multiple, even contradictory things at the same time? Like, how do we learn to do that as humans?
I don't know in our development if we, or like in school, maybe if we're lucky in our home and our parents have learned that, or now if we have more counselors in our lives or people in our lives who have learned things like this, if it's becoming more common, I think. Um, but before that, maybe if someone just figured it out for themselves, um, they could share that knowledge of, yeah, it can be both, and have that compassion, hold hold that with someone, teach them to do that. I love as you bring up development. I was kind of mulling over, like, where does this come from? This need to choose or not being able to hold both, or having when they are feel really contradictory or conflicting. And I wondered if maybe it's part of our moral development, even of this
Mm.
good and bad, right and wrong, black and white kind of thinking. And again, maybe it's an efficiency in our mind or a cultural piece. But that was the question I had, was like, does our moral development play a
Mm.
part? What do you think?
I Okay, two things. I want to touch on something you said that I loved, because you talked about how now there is so much more emphasis on educating people on their emotions. Like, I have kids in school, and they talk about emotions in school. Like, there there's a counselor who, like, in my son's kindergarten class, when he was in kindergarten, there was a counselor who, it was either once a month or once every few weeks, they would come into class, or the class would go to their room. I don't exactly know where they met, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that the class and the counselor would meet, and they'd talk through emotions, and they'd talk through some self-regulating stuff, and, like, that's really cool. And I love that there is that emphasis on that now, and I think that's really helpful and healthy. But I also loved that you kind of acknowledged this idea that even if you didn't have that, there is still this intuitive piece where if we allow ourselves to actually feel things instead of suppressing them, pushing them away, avoiding them, numbing them, whatever we're doing to get rid of them, if we actually allow ourselves to feel them, there is a lot that we can gain and grasp and understand without the, like, formal education or teaching around it. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really good. In answer to your question, though, I think that because of how societally or morally we're often handed this idea of, like, there's the right way and then there's the wrong way, we do look at a lot of things like that. We look at a lot of things as being black and white. And I think it's impossible for us not to apply that to our emotions, even though arguably it's not that healthy. And one of the ways I think we do is that we look at the things that, again, are uncomfortable. This is kind of what we talked about last time, where it's like, that's an uncomfortable emotion. I don't want to feel that. We look at those things, and we'll always choose them after we choose what's fun, after we choose what's pleasant, after we choose the things that we actually want to feel. And so I think often what happens as a result of that is, when we're experiencing multiple, if one of them is comfortable and desirable and one of them is not, we judge ourselves for the one that we don't want to be feeling. Like, "Oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I should only be excited. I should only be happy. I should only be fill in the blank." And that actually can get in the way of enabling us to slow down and acknowledge, there are multiple sides to this. There are sides that are exciting and new and fun and relieving, and sides that are sad and hard and bring out grief.
I love the way you said that and explained that of like I that's such a common thing I hear is I shouldn't be feeling that way or that one's bad. The negative emotions, we hear that a lot. Um, and yeah, how does that change our experience? Because as I think about that, when something is good and we want it, we chase it or we grasp
Hmm.
it and we hold it tightly. And when something is bad, we push it away most often, or we avoid it, or we do that. And then going back to what are emotions for?
Hmm.
What are they? What's the purpose of them? Like we talked about in the last episode, just bringing out like, can we interpret them differently? Are
Hmm.
if emotions are just messages, can you get a really bad message, or is it
Hmm.
just maybe a really uncomfortable message that's telling you something maybe valuable or important? So that's an interesting question. And as you were asking that, I even had the curiosity towards like how often do we only feel one emotion?
Ooh, it's a good question. And I think the answer is not that often. Because a lot of the time, life is not as black and white as like, I'm just happy here. Another example of what that could look like is, let's say there's something you've wanted for a long time. Let's say there's a car that you've wanted for a long time. It's exciting and it's fun to think about the idea of getting it, but also to get it, you're going to have to let go of or hand over a significant amount of money, which took a significant amount of time to earn. And that brings feelings with it also. Because we have the feeling of like excitement of something new that we've desired, but also the feeling of letting go of and even of loss of like something that we had that we've earned to get there. With every experience, there will always be some element of both, even if it's just the I love this moment and this moment's going to end. Like as a parent, I feel that all the time where I'm like, I love I love the moments of like getting to snuggle with my kids or when they need me in a way that they won't always need me. I was talking to my wife about this last night because I have 4 kids now. We recently had a fourth,
Yeah.
and 2 nights ago I had the distinct privilege of being woken up by 3 different children in one night at multiple different times. And I mean that's a great example of a time where I'm experiencing a lot of emotions because I'm not thrilled to not be getting sleep, but also to be needed is very heartwarming. And I try and hold on to that while also uh, trying to grapple with the feeling of like, do you know how badly daddy needs sleep right now? Like really bad. Like my brain is not working anymore. I need sleep. And I think this is somewhere where having multiple emotions can be really valuable because when I'm holding the uh, part of that experience, I can also then try and hold the yes, it is frustrating, but also think about this. Think about how this is a short period of time, a short season in life, and then I won't be needed by these kids in the same way. I think we could, going back to the initial question, I think we could almost always come up with a reason, or not a reason. We could almost always come up with multiple emotions for any experience. And I think that a lot of the time those things inform like, oh, what is the bigger picture that's going on here? They give value in helping us to have perspective when we're experiencing something uncomfortable, but there's maybe a good reason for it or a reason to try and appreciate it.
Mm.
Like in a way, I think that's where having multiple emotions at the same time can become so valuable.
Yeah, I love that example, and I love like the awareness of that other emotion there, like allowing both to be. Because of course, when we're not getting sleep, like I need that. That's part of being human too, and this precious, tender, like um, impermanence that is that moment of being needed and being able to care for another being, um, and that loving act of doing so. And if you just had one, or even felt bad for having the ugh, I need sleep, like that kind of takes away the joy too of being able to hold the other one, because
Mm,
you're spending energy on trying to push that one away. So being able
mm.
to just allow both to be there is an act of compassion in my eyes. And how do we do that?
It's not easy. Like in some moments, it definitely is. But especially in moments like that, it's not. Because often my first thought when I get woken up is not, oh, I'm so glad that right now at 2 in the morning, I am wide awake. My first thought is usually, why? 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 Why are. It's dark. It's nighttime. Why are we here? And I think that a lot of the time, at least for me, it's about pausing. It's about making the space to be like, okay, yes, I don't feel great about this situation in this moment, but also this moment is very temporary. Like, this moment will be the past. The second I go to sleep again, when I wake up in the morning, this moment will be kind of a footnote of like, oh yeah, that did happen, didn't it? But even broader than that, every experience that we're in the moment is temporary, and therefore allowing myself to be like, okay, if this is temporary, if this is something that I don't have to endure forever, I just have to get through it right now, what might be the value in it? What might be something to learn from it? What might be a way to hold it that makes it more holdable? Because not every I'm not one of the people who believe that every moment is there to teach you something. I don't think we should silver line everything. In fact, I think that can be very harmful in a lot of contexts. But I do think that when we have different perspectives, or when we can hold different perspectives in different emotions, even when they're contradictory, it can make it so that we can endure whatever it is we're experiencing, maybe more effectively, maybe more easily, maybe just it'll make it feel faster.
Interesting. Yeah. You brought a couple different pieces of like that process, for you of pausing, reflecting on the impermanence and what else is here. There's there's the ugh and what else, and then kind of opening up and allowing that to be. And it's interesting too because, um, as we've been talking about it, I just notice some of the language that comes up that can be contradictory to the process.
Mm,
That's really common and really simple. And so there are these times when this can be really difficult. And there's also some skills and little tweaks we can do to just help our mind, make that easier. So one of the things I keep hearing is but.
mm,
So this, but this. And that in a sentence takes away the ability for both to be. Like
mm,
it kind of cancels one out. So even just replacing but with and. So this
mm,
and this is one simple way we can language, ourselves into that space. Another one, that I really like is instead of using good and bad, is like what is here right now. There's unpleasant, there's pleasant, there's neutral, there's discomfort, maybe there's tension, but just kind of taking away that like this is a good thing or a bad thing, a negative thing or a positive
mm,
thing. Maybe it's just a thing, and I can just notice it. It doesn't have to be evaluated, just observed. So
mm,
those are a couple things that help me in this process. Being like,
mm,
okay, what am I noticing? Um, can I use and for that where I am able to discern the different emotions, or even just the body sensations. I have tension in my stomach and ease in my hands, or neutrality in my earlobes, like, and just bringing, those things in using something that is so
mm.
common to us, which is our language. We're constantly using language.
Oh, a lot of that sounds very much like the idea of having curiosity and interest and being open to the experience that you're having. and actually making space for it, which is so valuable and so easy to neglect. And I think that like one of the things that stood out there is that idea, the idea of the but, the idea that we kind of hold where these things can't exist at the same time when they can. And it's funny because when I work with clients, they always chuckle because I very often work hard to use and instead of but in a way that's very emphasized, like this and this. But I don't think that but is entirely all bad, because if anything, I think it highlights areas where it feels like these things should cancel each other out. And in a sense, it can almost serve as a flag of like, wait, do they?
Mm.
Do they actually? Or does it just feel like they should? Does it feel like they do?
Yeah, I love that you bring that up too, because there's no 100% in either
Mm-hmm.
direction. There's no we only use and, we will never use but again kind of thing. There are circumstances where but is valuable as a word, as a languaging device, as explaining or describing an experience or life. And where is it not helping us?
Mm-hmm.
Where is it not useful? Where would and be more useful? So using it as a flag or an awareness, like, oh, I noticed I just said that word again. Let me check
Mm-hmm.
in. Um, yeah, could be really helpful to even bring our mind to some awareness of like, this is a time now to be curious or to pause or reflect.
Also, I will add one more thing. This this is slightly going off on a tangent, but using the word "but" is also it's a really helpful technique for storytelling because it creates tension.
Mm.
Like this thing is happening, and this thing over here is happening, and there's no tension there. But if I tell you about one more thing that's happening, now you're listening because you're like, oh, that wait, what? There's something here that makes it so that it's not all just straightforward and it makes sense.
That's so interesting too. And from your narrative perspective, I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have thought of that. Um, and when you say that, I can hear it as you explained even just those two simple sentences, but it draws you in. So
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely value to it. Yeah. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because sometimes as we're talking of like, oh, let's try these other things, it can, our mind does this thing where it creates rules, again, an
Mm-hmm.
efficiency of, oh, okay, now I just do it this way. Now I just switch over. And a big portion of this opening up is to be able to slow down and look at the context, what is
Mm-hmm.
needed, and to be more flexible in what we need at that time, what is useful for this moment, um, to help us move towards our life that
Mm-hmm.
we are wanting to move towards, moving towards what matters to us.
One of the ways that when we're trending away from using the word "but," when it comes to feeling multiple or contradictory emotions at the same time, is that we have to look at them as more of a yes and. Because again, in this context, but says I'm feeling happy, but I'm also feeling sad, and that doesn't make sense. That that creates kind of a paradigm where we feel stuck. But if instead you're able to look at it and be like, I'm feeling this and I'm feeling that, where it's more of a yes, I am happy and I am also sad. It doesn't question that either of them exist. It doesn't criticize that either of them are there or judge them for being. It just acknowledges, yeah, these things are both here. Let's make space to feel that. Let's make space to actually explore what do these things mean and what do we want to do with them.
Then what's next? What do we do with them? And I'm curious, so you kind of talked about your process, of pausing, reflecting on the impermanence, opening up. And a lot of that seems intellectual, kind of that
Mm.
in the mind. Um, I'm wondering, is there anything missing there?
Intellectualizing our emotions is such a funny thing because so often the act of intellectualizing, not labeled as the act, but the actual act of doing it, where we're talking like, this is what I'm feeling and I'm very self aware of it, that gets praised and it gets seen as like, yes, that's what you want to go for. That's how you should be. When in reality, we only get to do that once we're through like the deep feeling of something. Like, let's say I'm feeling angry, because that's a nice visceral one. If I'm feeling angry and my blood pressure is up and my heart rate is rising and my skin feels warm, in that moment, I'm feeling that. I'm experiencing that as a visceral, this is an emotion that is fully connected and intertwined with my physical experience, and things are happening. And yes, intellectualizing that and being like, yes, this probably stems from my childhood, pulls you out of that. And honestly, in that moment, that can be really helpful because it can make it so you don't act out of the anger and do something you'll regret. But also, I think when we're able to, which nobody is perfect at this. In fact, I think all of us have a lot of room to grow with this. When we're able to, in those moments, hold a semblance of, I'm not going to act on the anger, but I'm going to sit with it and feel what it feels like in my body. Notice the tension, notice the burning sensation, notice like, what is this? And allow myself to be with it. It can make the experience of holding that more manageable almost. Because we can realize, as uncomfortable as this is, as much as it drives me to want to do something, it's okay. It's not going to crush me. It's not going to end me. It's just a big feeling. Did
Yeah.
that answer your question?
Yes, and so yes, in going in, feelings and emotions are coursing through our body as much as they are then also triggered in different ways in the mind with thoughts and memories, images, and things. But yeah, the body has a huge place to be able to connect with and allow us to experience the emotions and to be able to heal from them or just watch them come and go. Emotions don't, without some sort of stimulus or catalyst for them to continue to be there, they don't last forever. They don't
Mm-hmm.
last even very long unless they're prolonged. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so this mindfulness, this observing with curiosity and not judging them, is a beautiful way, again, to bring compassion to your experience, but also to be able to allow them to come and go as they naturally do, and to not take over your life, to not be something you have to get rid of
Mm-hmm.
or hold on to. And it brings up this point for me of not needing to trust the mind always.
Mm-hmm.
So our minds say, like, we need to get rid of that emotion. We can't feel that. It's going to hurt
Mm-hmm.
us. It's threatening. And it's maybe really subtle, like, but because it's so uncomfortable, we just generally, naturally shy away from it. Um, and can we look at our experience instead?
Mm-hmm.
Has has when my mind says, like, if I start crying, I won't stop. Has that ever been true? Because I can't remember a time in my I can remember some times where I have cried harder
Mm-hmm.
than most people maybe have ever let themselves cry. And it doesn't last forever. There's
Mm-hmm.
no way to sustain that amount of energy, um, or that amount of like liquid even in your body. At some point, you need
Mm-hmm.
to take a break and refuel, rehydrate. Um, so just recognizing those experiences where it's like, where's my mind telling me that this is going to happen, and where does my experience maybe contradict that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it tells me I can't feel this. What if I try? What's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And just being willing to sit in that space of a little bit of unknown, um, which can be uncomfortable.
It can. And
And
I love that.
it can be valuable
Yeah.
and empowering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What could you do in your life uh, with those emotions there? What would you do that matters
Mm-hmm.
to you if you didn't have to put all this energy into getting rid of them or struggling with them?
So it's a big question. And I mean, in a lot of ways, I think the answer would be very positive for most people because it would enable us to be able to spend our time and energy actually engaging with the things that the emotions are about or connected to rather than wrestling with the emotions perpetually or
Hmm.
burying them or hiding from them or fill in the blank. Part of like the value of connecting mindfulness to emotions and curiosity is working to honor what we feel.
Hmm.
Because when we're feeling something, like it matters to do something with it. It matters to take it and be like, ooh, yeah, I'm holding some sadness, I'm holding some anger, I'm holding some happiness, some joy, some whatever it is. Because when we hold it, it can become more familiar. It can become something that we're more comfortable with, which can enable us to be able to respond more intentionally.
Hmm.
Like if every time I get angry, I feel like I've used anger a lot today, probably because I'm tired.
It's showing up for you.
But if every time I'm angry, I'm like, oh, I have to end this situation, it's going to make it so that I'm going to respond in ways that probably 9 or 10 times out of 10 I will regret. I will then feel guilt for, I will then feel sad about, I will then probably should apologize for. But the more we can hold it, the more I can hold those feelings and be like, okay, whew, feeling this viscerally, let's make space, let's be mindful, let's hold it. The more I'm able to then, like, intellectualization is a funny thing because it can totally take us out of our emotions, but it can, in balance with holding our emotions, be incredibly valuable because we can begin to explore and understand if I'm having this reaction, where did that come from? Because so much of how we respond to certain emotions is learned. We learned it from our parents, we learned it from society, we learned it from seeing things, observing whatever. Like it shows up because we've learned that that's how it should show up. And the way that we work through that is to make space for being able to hold it and then exploring it and being like, oh, I'm realizing that part of the reason that this anger shows up for me so much right here is likely because of something that I experienced here that I never worked through. And so then actually being able to be comfortable enough with the feeling to then approach that and work through it to make space for all of the other things, either the emotions that we're feeling in that moment or just whatever we need to do. Like that's a really valuable thing to be able to engage with.
Yeah, and as you say that, what comes up for me too is if we again if we're thinking about this as these emotions as messengers, as information givers, then if I'm not listening, what does
Mm-hmm.
that emotion have to do to be heard? It gets louder. It gets more intense. So me pushing it away, is it working to actually get rid of it? And again, just
Mm-hmm.
with let's use the brain in that sense. It's like if it's not working, let's try something different.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe listening would be something, and I don't know if that's going to work for everyone. I don't know exactly what everyone's experience is, and not in every moment will that be useful or valuable or interesting to someone. Just in the basic sense of trying something else, so you don't feel like you're stuck or going crazy. Like, is it worth it to do it even just for that? Like, let's just try something different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I hear in as you talk about it too, there's a piece of needing to do something with it, or how do we interpret it or explore it? And I think that is incredibly valuable in so many ways, and so often that is a beautiful way to process and heal. Um, and there are spaces too where it's simply acknowledging it, like,
Mm-hmm.
yep, here's this message or here's this emotion. That's part of my
Mm-hmm.
human experience right now. Um, Maybe I don't need to do anything with it. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
just allowing it and accepting it as that information is enough. So it
Right.
doesn't always have to be so involved, too. It can be, and that can be valuable and helpful,
Mhm.
but not always.
Yes, that is an excellent point. And that kind of brings me back to that question you brought up of, if I start crying, will I cry forever? And it's true what you said. Like, we won't cry forever. It just, physically, it's not possible, and it's never happened before. And a lot of the time, I think the only way we know how much space something needs in our life is if we give it the space and see how much it takes.
Mm.
Because, like, I will get asked by clients a lot, how do I know when it's been enough? How do I know when I felt it enough?
Mm.
And almost always my response is, you'll know, because there will suddenly be space for more.
Mm.
Like, you cry, and then the tears stop, and then you take a breath, and you see what comes next.
So allowing it to come and stay and go.
Mhm.
When it comes back, you do the same thing. And then, yeah, and it changes. It's all impermanent.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful thing. I wanted to add, just as an invitation, I guess, to a small practice that helps me do this,
Mhm.
is a short, in a way, mindfulness, but it doesn't have to be labeled as that. Just kind of scanning through the body, maybe from head to your toes, and checking in with tension or ease. You can label as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then as you notice whatever is there, just inviting a deep breath and imagine breathing space around what is there. And just giving it a little bit of extra space to be there, not trying to change it or get rid of it.
Mhm.
And just doing that a few times. Um, and for me, that's something that is really helpful in practicing that acceptance and that allowing,
Mhm.
is not only to acknowledge and connect with what's showing up, but then also just to breathe some space into it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, if that's interesting to you, feel free to try it.
Making the space to find the perspective of stepping back, slowing down, it can so often make that thing that feels so big seem much more proportionate.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
it's only huge when our face is right up next to it.
Hmm. And it feels overwhelming.
Mhm.
Sometimes these emotions can feel really, really big, and like they're bigger than us. And then when we find it in the body, it's almost always, I mean, there's no way it can be outside of this physical form.
Mhm.
So, in a way, there's no way it can be bigger than us.
Mhm.
It's, yeah. So, that can be really helpful to bring that perspective in the little space.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for doing that.
Hmm.
Yeah. And on that note, that is my phrase for
Hmm.
how I end therapy sessions. Say, on that note, um, we really appreciate all of you who've gotten this far, listening to this, and maybe hopefully engaging with some of this conversation. We would love to hear from you in the comments, what you thought, what you observed, anything that resonated, any questions you have. Feel free to leave those wherever you're watching, hearing, consuming this. But otherwise, we again thank you for joining us and making the space for it. And until next time, have a lovely whatever time of day it is.
Yes. We'll see you next time.